Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Basic Education Board.
Hello, students. Welcome to TV Learning Program. My name is Benon. I'll be taking Senior 1 students in Biology. Dear students, remember, we talk about environment, and this environment is very important because that's where all of us live. This environment accommodates animals, it accommodates plants, and is very nice. And these days, humans are putting or designing measures for protecting environment for the future generations. That's your responsibility, my responsibility for protecting this environment for our health and for the health of the future generations. That's why we are encouraged to plant different plants in our environment, fruits, and different trees for different functions. My question is, students, what are the main parts of a plant? Excellent. Plants have leaves, plants have stem, plants have roots, plants have flowers, plants have seeds, and plants have fruits. Of course, inside fruits, that's where we find seeds. Now, after seeing our responsibility of protecting our environment, let us talk about our lesson today. Our lesson today is from Unit 3, the external structure and the importance of flowering plants. External structure and the importance of flowering plants. This is from Unit 3, and then the lesson is basic parts of the flower and their functions. Our objectives. Students, by the end of this lesson, make sure you are able to identify different parts of the flower and their functions. Make sure you're able to explain the role of the flower in the process of pollination. Students, plants are classified on the basis of the presence of the flower as flowering plants and non-flowering plants. That means flowering plants have flowers, non-flowering plants don't have flowers. And a flower is a characteristic feature of flowering plants and is actually extension of the shoot. It is also meant for reproduction. Remember, when we talk about shoot system, we mean upper organs of the plant. Of course, organs which are not in the soil, like roots. Then, flowers are attractive and appear in different colors, different shapes to attract pollinators. Those are organisms which come to pollinate plants. Students, most flowers have 4 main parts. Here we talk about sepals. These are parts of the flower. We talk about petals. We talk about stamens and carpels. When we talk about stamens, these are male parts, while carpels are female parts of the flower. And then the flower, which has got both male and female reproductive organs, we call it hermaphrodite because it has got male parts and female parts. Others may contain one of them, male parts or female parts. If a flower has both male and female parts, it is a bisexual flower. And it means it has both stamens and carpels. When a plant has only one part, that means it is unisexual or it has one sex. For example, flowers which lack stamens are called carpellate, and flowers which lack carpels are called staminate. That means they are staminate because they have male parts. Flowers or plants which have female parts are called carpellate because they have carpels or pistil. Students, this is our very nice flower. It's very nice, and it has different parts, and those parts perform different functions. Let us see those parts. Of course, you know how flowers are very important. People like flowers because of their smell, or for decoration, or we even need them for getting new plants. Now, let us talk about different parts and their functions. Let us start with this part here. You can see this is the stem. Of course, the stem is the continuation of the root system. And from the stem, of course, that's where flowers are attached. This is the receptacle where organs of the plant are attached. Then from there, we have what we call sepals. These green small leaves are called sepals. And sepals are very important because they protect young parts or organs of the plant. Students, sepals are important. They protect young parts of the flower. That means when they are still young and they are growing. From there, we have what we call petals. As you can see, petals are colored. That's why people like flowers, different colors. So these petals are colored, and being colored is an adaptation. It's an important function. Why? They attract pollinators. When pollinators see the colors of the flower, they come on the flowers. So the function of petals is to attract pollinators. Here we can think of birds, we can think of insects like bees, wasps, and so on. Those are very important. And they come to the flower to do what? Students, why do those pollinators come to the flower? They come looking for nectar. And do you know nectar? Here we can say flowers have nectar, and insects come looking for nectar. This nectar is a liquid substance which has sugars, different sugars, which means it tastes sweet. It has sugars like fructose, it has sugars like glucose, it has sucrose, it has some proteins, it also has oil substances, which means when we see these components, it shows that flowers which have nectar are essential to pollinators like bees, wasps, and birds. So those pollinators come looking for these sugary substances so that they can feed on them, get them as the source of food. And in that process, we benefit because flowers will be pollinated. And when they are pollinated, that means we are likely to get new plants. When we get new plants, we will get food to eat. Even our environment will look nice. The nature will be green, and the environment will be protected. That means sepals are colored to attract insects. Then we have what we call stamen. Students, we have seen that stamen is the male part of the flower. It is made up of filament and anther. This is the filament. The filament is slender, thread-like, and the function of the filament is to hold the anther in proper position so that anthers are exposed. And anthers contain pollen, and inside pollen we find their pollen grains, which are very important as we are going to see. From there, we have the female part of the flower, which is called pistil, or we can even call it carpel. This one is made up of three main parts. It has the stigma. The stigma is very important. It has the style, and it has the ovary. Those are three main parts of pistil. Pistil, which is the female part of a flower. Can we repeat them? Pistil has three main parts: stigma, style, and ovary. And those parts perform different functions. This stigma has the sticky substance and is very important in receiving pollen grains. Then this style, you can see it's slender-like and thread, and that means it holds the stigma in proper position so that this stigma can be exposed. When it is exposed, that means the function of pollination will take place easily. Inside the style, we have what we call pollen tube. And we are going to see that when pollen grains fall on the stigma, they are going to be transported by the pollen tube, which is this part, the pollen tube, and go down into the ovary. Then, as you can see, students, this is the ovary. This is the ovary. And inside the ovary, we have ovules. These are the ovules. And these ovules are very important. Now, let us make a quick review of the parts of the flower. We have seen it has receptacle, which holds other parts of the flower because you can see other organs attached there. Then it has sepals for protecting the young parts of the flower. It has petals which are colored to attract insects. Then the flower has stamen, the male part of the flower, made up of the filament for holding the anther in proper position. Then there is anther, which produces pollen grains. Then from there, the flower has the female part, which is called pistil or carpel, that is made up of the stigma responsible for receiving pollen grains. Then there is style, which holds the stigma in proper position and has inside the pollen tube for transporting pollen grains. Then there is ovary, which has ovules inside. Then from there, if we cut the cross-section of the stem, we can see that it has what we call vascular bundles. And vascular bundles are xylem and phloem. These are responsible for transporting food, water, and mineral salts to different parts of the plant. Xylem vessels transport water and mineral salts from roots to upper parts of the plant. Phloem vessels transport food from one part of the plant, let us say leaves, to other parts of the plant. Students, we have talked about different parts of the flower, and we have seen their functions. Now, this is the structure of the stamen. Stamen, remember we said it is excellent. It is the male part of the flower. This stamen has pollen sacs. You can see these pollen sacs are 4. And inside pollen sacs, that's where we find pollen. And pollen has pollen grains. Then you can see this is the filament, which holds the anthers in proper position. Then anthers, we have seen, they have pollen sacs, which contain pollen, pollen which contains pollen grains. Then this is the pistil, which is made up of 3 main parts: stigma, style, and ovary. the ovary, inside the ovary we have ovules. Then the style holds the stigma in proper position. Inside the style we have seen we have pollen tube for transporting pollen grains to the ovary. And then the stigma has the sticky substance for receiving pollen grains from anthers. Here, the collection of pistil is what we call gynoecium, the female parts of the flower, while the male parts of the flower are called androecium. Students, we have described parts of the flower and their functions. And now the question is, how are flowers important? They are important for decoration. They are also important for reproduction. This is an important point, important for reproduction in plants. Now, let us talk about pollination and see the role of flowers in reproduction. Students, do you understand the meaning of the term pollination? Excellent. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anthers of the stamen to the stigma of pistil. The transfer of pollen grains from anthers of the stamen or the male parts to the stigma of the female part or pistil. How many types of pollination do you know? We have two main types. We have cross-pollination. We also have self-pollination. Here we can say we have pollination, which is divided into two types. We have cross-pollination. Then we also have self-pollination. These are two main types of pollination. Students, how are they different? How are these two types of pollination different? Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of the stamen of one flower to the stigma of pistil of another flower. Let us say we have two flowers, of course, of the same species. The transfer of pollen grains from anther of this flower to the stigma of this flower is what we call cross-pollination. And this is done by pollinators we talked about. Self-pollination. This one is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of one flower. One flower. You see how they are different. Let us see on the diagram. This is our flower we talked about. This is another flower. You see they look the same, which means they are of the same species. And then with cross-pollination, that means these are the anthers. The anthers which produce pollen grains. And then the pollen grains, you see, they have been produced. And then they are going to be transferred by the bee. You see, this is the bee. It has the pollen grains which are stuck on its legs and abdomen. And then they are going to be transferred to the stigma of another flower. So the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower is what we call cross-pollination. And this is where we talk about the role of pollinators. Birds, insects like bees, wasps, and others. They come looking for nectar from flowers. Of course, they are attracted by the color of petals, by the scent or the smell of flowers, and then they come looking for nectar as their source of food. In that process, the pollen grains are stuck on their body parts. As they move to another flower looking for nectar, they pollinate it. And this pollination is very important because in that process, when pollen are stuck on the stigma, that means pollen grains are going to move through the pollen tube and go to the ovary. Remember, inside the ovary, we have ovules. These ovules are going to be fertilized by the pollen grain, and in that process, fertilization will take place. When it takes place, that means the fusion of male and female gametes will lead to reproduction, and in this case, the ovules which have been fertilized are going to turn into seeds, and then the ovary will turn into the fruit. And then we are going to see that the fruits have seeds inside them. This happens by the process of pollination. And in that case, when we have seeds, that means we are able to grow them in our environment and get new plants. That's why plants are very important. We need to protect them. They are good sources of food because when you eat fruits, you will get vitamins, you will get different nutrients like fructose and glucose. You will also use those seeds to plant them and get new plants. That is cross-pollination. Then we have what we call self-pollination. This is the anther we have talked about, which is part of the stamen which is male reproductive part of the flower. This stamen has anthers which produce pollen. As you can see, these are the pollen which have pollen grains that are going to be transported to the stigma by the process of pollination, and this is done by pollinators, birds, insects, and so on. Even wind can do this. And then in that process, when pollen grains fall here, they are going to be transported to the ovary, and inside the ovary they will meet ovules. Then the process of fertilization will take place. And when it takes place, the ovary will turn into a fruit, and ovules will turn into seeds. So we will get the fruits which have seeds, seeds which can be grown to produce new plants. Students, as you can see, we have talked about flowers as organs of the plant. We have described different parts of the flower, and we have seen their functions. We have seen what we call pollination, which is the transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma. Then we have talked about two types of pollination. That means cross-pollination and self-pollination. And we have seen their difference. Do you remember their difference? Are you able to give the difference between cross-pollination and self-pollination? Excellent. Cross-pollination, we have seen that it is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. Then we have seen self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of the same flower. We have talked about pollinators. We have seen birds are very important. We have seen insects are very important. We have seen that wind is also important in the process of pollination. Students, that's why every day, they are advising us, of course, through Ministry of Environment, that let us protect our environment. Because when we protect our birds, they will pollinate our flowers, and we will get fruits, we will get seeds to plant and get new crops. Students, let us protect our insects like bees and wasps. Remember, bees give you honey, which has a lot of nutrients, and some people can use it as the source of medicine. Let us protect them. They pollinate our flowers. Students, let us protect our rivers. They have different plants. They have different animals. Let us protect our lakes. They have different plants. They have different animals. Let us protect our mountains. They have different plants. They have different animals. Let us protect our environment. This starts with you and I. Let us protect our environment. Of course, the plant has roots. The plant has the stem. The plant has leaves. The plant has flowers. Flowers are needed for different functions. Before we end our lesson today, let us test our level of understanding. This is your homework. Students, the first question says, explain why flowers are considered as important organs of the plant. Why are flowers important? Question number 2, what is the difference between stamen and pistil of the flower? Question number 3, explain the importance of flowering plants of the plant. Explain how these organs are important. Petals, sepals, stigma, anthers, and ovary. That means you will be explaining the importance of these organs or parts of the plant. Question number 4, explain the role of bees in reproduction of plants. How are bees important in reproduction? Question number 5, what is the difference between gynoecium and androecium? Question number 6, how is cross-pollination different from self-pollination? Dear students, thank you for your active participation. Enjoy the rest of the day.